everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are doing my June book haul, which is more like a May and June book haul because I never did one for May, and I have acquired quite a few books over the last 2 months. I think I have like 21 books to talk about today, which is quite large for me for a book haul, but I feel like this happens every year that my June book haul is a lot larger than my usual hauls. So I don't know why that is, but I'm gonna try to go quickly through these, otherwise this video is going to take forever. So as per usual, we're gonna get started with the new releases. So I have 2 May releases. The first one is Mr. Impossible by Maggie Stiefvater. This is the second book in the Dreamer trilogy, which is the spin-off series from the Raven Cycle, which is one of my favorite series. But this one is following specifically Ronan Lynch and the Lynch brothers as they are trying to save and or destroy the world. Sometimes it's ambiguous as to what is happening in the scenario. But I've already read this one and it will be in my June wrap-up. Then the other May release that I had is Dream Country by Ashay Brown. I think this is a YA fantasy, and it says that it's about the dysfunctional triplet gods of sleep, dreams, and nightmares as they are kept separate by the deadly gates of horn and ivory. And that just sounds really cool. The triplet gods of sleep, dreams, and nightmares, like, that just immediately intrigues me. So that's why I picked this one up. Then I have 3 releases from June. So first up is For the Wolf by Hannah Whitten. This is, I think, like a combined retelling of Little Red Riding Hood and Beauty and the Beast, maybe? And it says the first daughter is for the throne, the second daughter is for the wolf. And so the main character that we're following is named Red, and she is meant to be sacrificed to the wolf. And I think this is supposed to like protect their world from these like gods that they're trying to stop the gods from coming back, I think. But she finds out a lot of things, like that the wolf is a man, not a monster. Her magic is a calling, not a curse. And if she doesn't use how to use it, the monsters the gods have become will swallow the wilder wood and her world whole. So I think that sounds really cool. Always love a good retelling, and it promises to have good forest vibes. So always excited about that. Then another one that I think promises to have forest vibes to it is The Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava Reid. This, I am less clear as to what the plot is about, but I do know that it is inspired by Hungarian history and Jewish folklore, and that is always exciting to me. I'm always here for nature fantasy, forest fantasy, and also always interested in Jewish fantasy. So I'm excited for this one also. And then the last new release that we have is The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. So Tasha Suri wrote the Books of Amba duology, which I am currently reading the second book. And I enjoyed the first book. I'm enjoying the second one so far. And I am excited to have a new book from her. I'm very intrigued to see like what she does with this new series, because I think the Books of Amba duology was her debut. So it's always interesting to see what an author's like second series is going to be like, because I think this is the beginning of a new series. I think that in this we're following a princess whose brother has taken over the throne and has kind of locked her away, and the only person that has access to her is like a servant who like brings her food and stuff. But then the two of them maybe end up teaming up in order to take back the throne from her brother, and I think there's a female-female romance in it, and I've heard really good things about it so far. So that one's very exciting. Okay, so those are all of the new releases. Now we're getting into just the other stuff that I got. So in May, I suddenly got this like desire to read sci-fi, which I never actually did. I just bought sci-fi books because that's the logical thing to do, obviously. But I did restrain myself because I had like a list of a bunch of different sci-fi books, and then I was like, no, only buy 2, because the fact is I very rarely read sci-fi, so it doesn't make sense for me to buy like 10 sci-fi books. So I restrained myself and I only got 2. The first one is A Bad Deal for the Whole Galaxy by Alex White. This is the second book in the Salvagers trilogy, which I read the first book maybe 3 years ago or something like that. So I don't remember it that well, but I remember it being a really fun sci-fi that is kind of sci-fantasy because they have technology that's powered by magic. One of the main characters is able to kind of like psychically link to technology and use magic to control it. But it also has, you know, AI, and they're on spaceships, and it's about this kind of ragtag group of people who try to salvage like ships that they find out in space. But in the first book, I think they were on a mission doing that, and then they got sucked into this larger like universe-wide conspiracy. So I don't really know what the second book is about, but I remember the first one being fun, so I got the second. And then the other one, I don't know too much about this book, but I kind of don't want to know a lot about it, which is The First Sister by Lyndon A. Lewis. So for one thing, this has a beautiful cover, but also, so the beginning of the description says, First Sister has no name and no voice. As a priestess of the sisterhood, she travels the stars alongside the soldiers of Earth and Mars, the same ones who own the rights to her body and soul. And that, I don't know, it sounds like it's going to be a really interesting story. There's more to the description, but I kind of don't want to know a lot more about it. But yeah, so those are the 2 sci-fi books that I got recently. Then I have a bunch of fantasy that I picked up as per usual. So I have 2 books from Michelle West. One of them is The Sacred Hunt The Sacred Hunt duology. So Hunter's Oath and Hunter's Death are both in this bind-up. I've already read the first book, Hunter's Oath, in May, so I'll link my May wrap-up if you want to know what I thought of it. Overall, I was just kind of like, it was fine. It wasn't like, I wasn't that into it. But I have heard really great things about later series that are set in this world, because Michelle West writes multiple series in this fantasy world. And I've heard that this is the first series that she wrote in that world, and people say that it is the weakest. So it's definitely not the best one. So that has inspired me to still continue on, even though I wasn't super impressed with this first book. At the moment, originally I was planning to read the second book in this duology, but now I'm wondering if I should just skip it, because I also have heard that it's kind of unnecessary. Like, there isn't really important information to know from this duology, so I might just skip the second book in this and like circle back around to it later if I like later, like other series. But I did also get The Hidden City by Michelle West, which is the first book in the House Wars series, which is one of her later series that people say is like very, very good. I don't actually know too much about this series. I know that it follows this character named Jewel, who goes by Jay, and that she, I think, is an orphan and a thief, and then she is rescued by someone named Wrath, which is not a name that really instills confidence, but whatever. And so he rescues her and saves her life, and then she feels that she has to repay him, and so she gets pulled into magical things that are going on with him. I don't really know too much about what's happening in this series, but I do want to start this series and get further into this world, because there are a lot of different opinions about the reading order that you should read Michelle West's books in, but the reading order I chose would go after this duology, starting here. So I'm still debating whether I'm going to read the second book in this bind-up or if I'm just going to skip to this book. But I got both of those. Then I also picked up Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. This, I feel like, has been getting a lot of attention on BookTube recently. I know that it has like bone magic in it, where people use shards of bone to create constructs. I think the main character also has some kind of memory loss that maybe her father is trying to manipulate. I don't know a lot about the plot, but I always hear really great things about this one, so I decided to pick this one up. Then I also got a book that's the second in a duology, which is The Beast Warrior by Nhoko Oheshi. So the first book was The Beast Player, which I read maybe 2 years ago. And I had some mixed feelings about the first book. I loved the first half of the book, and then I was kind of just okay about the second half of the book. But I was intrigued enough that when I found out there was a sequel, I wanted to get the sequel. So this is a series that was originally published in Japanese, I believe, and the English translations have just recently came out. I think this translation just came out last year. So when I read the first book, I didn't realize that there was a second book in the series, but then I think I stumbled across this on like Instagram and decided to get it. But in this, we're following this girl who has this great ability to like communicate with and care for animals. And so in the first book, she goes to this like academy to learn how to care for like the royal beasts. And then this one, I don't really know what happens. It takes place, I think, 10 years after the first one. So I feel like it's going to be maybe very different from that first book. I think I'm gonna have to reread the first one in order to read this. But maybe not, because it takes place 10 years after, so maybe it's disconnected enough. I don't know. I kind of want to reread the first one anyway, but I'm excited to read this one. Then I recently went to Barnes & Noble in person, which was very exciting because I haven't done that in a long time. And I impulse bought some books. So the first one that I got was Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, which I have heard so many great things about. And I think that this is historical fiction. It takes place in England, 1580, during the Black Death. And I think that it is about Shakespeare's son, who was named Hamnet, that people think the character Hamlet was named after, but I think Hamnet dies of the Black Plague, or the Black Death. So this seems like it's probably going to be sad, but it's actually a lot shorter than I had been expecting. It's like just 300 pages. Then the other one that I impulse bought, which is a book that like I've had my eye on for a while, but I hadn't really been planning to get until I saw it in person, is Crossings by Alex Landrigan. This is a book about books, which I feel like I should not be buying any books about books because I bought too many of them last year and then didn't like a lot of them. But I have learned more about what it is I like in books about books, and I feel like this one could work. Also, I love the cover. Like this, I love the eye that it has on the cover. But okay, so the premise of this, I think, is that we're following a bookbinder who does a lot of different kinds of like bookbinding, but he has a particular patron who orders like special edition like bindings for her books. And then one day she has a job for him, and one day she drops off a manuscript that she instructs him not to read, but I think he probably does end up reading it, and that's what this book is. This is essentially the manuscript that he is binding, and I think it is a combination of 3 like short stories that kind of interconnect but are also very different from each other. I also think this is one of those books where there are multiple ways to read it, where you can either read like each individual story, or you can read it in a way that kind of like cuts in between the stories. I have not decided yet which way I'm going to read it, but I am excited about this, and hopefully this book about books works for me and I am not disappointed again, and just all disappointed in the book or disappointed in myself for having fallen for another book about books. Okay, so then I have a couple of books that I got from Thrift Books, which, as always, Thrift Books is a little hit or miss, because I have 4 books here that I got from Thrift Books that are like great quality. I'm very happy with them. I had a 5th one, but I had to get rid of it because when it came, like, it physically looked fine, but it smelled so bad that I just had to get rid of it. Like, I couldn't, like, there wasn't anything I could do. I'm pretty sure it was probably like moldy or something, and I didn't want to put it around my other books. Like, it just smelled terrible. So that one was not great, but these 4 were fine. Okay, so the first one that I have is Rhapsody by Elizabeth Hayden. This is an adult high fantasy that I actually don't know that much about. It's one of those older fantasy books from either like the 90s or 2000s or something like that. Copy it, 1999. That has just kind of been on my radar for a while. I've been meaning to read for a while and I haven't gotten around to. So I've forgotten what it's about, but I decided to finally get it. Then I also picked up The White Mare by Jules Watson. This is one of those books that I saw on Goodreads in that little like suggested section that's like readers also enjoyed in regards to one of the books from the Seven Waters series by Juliet Marillier. We all know any book that is suggested, recommended, connected to in any way, compared to in any way to the Seven Waters series, I'm always intrigued by. And this is one that I have been meaning to pick up for a long time, and then I saw on Thrift Books that they had this edition, which I wanted this one in particular because some of the newer editions that are easier to come by, I really don't like the covers, so I wanted to get this older one. And this is another one that I have also kind of forgotten what it's about, but that's okay. I think it's historical fiction or historical fantasy, and I am interested to see if the comparison to Seven Waters makes any sense, because sometimes those comparisons make zero sense, so it'll be interesting. Then another historical fiction that I got is Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. This is a book that I have seen so many people talk about, and all I really know about it is that it's one, very long. This book is like 900 pages. It's like 960 pages. And that it's about building a church or like a cathedral or something. And that does not sound very interesting to me, but I have seen so many people rave about this book and say that like it sounds boring, but I promise it's interesting. And so I am trusting them. And I'm going to give this a try. We'll see. I don't know. And then I also got The Empire's Ghost by Isabel Steiger. So this one, I actually came across the second book when I was in Barnes & Noble. They didn't have the first one, so I ended up getting the first one from Thrift Books. And I don't remember what this one is about, but I think it's a very like political adult fantasy. That's all I got for you. Not very detailed description. But I have just a couple more books to show you. Okay, so I have two graphic novels that I got recently, which are Beautiful Darkness and The Daughters of Ys. I have already kind of read both of these. I DNF'd this one, I finished this one, and I really enjoyed The Daughters of Ys. So I will put, this was in my May wrap-up and this was in my spring DNFs, so I'll link those videos if you want to see what I thought of these. And then I have two nonfiction books that I have not read yet, but the first one is Hood Feminism by Mickey Kendall. This is one I've been meaning to read for a while. It's about like intersectional feminism, and I've heard incredible things about it, and I saw that it was on sale, so I was like, perfect time to pick it up. And then the other one that I got is Disfigured on Fairy Tales, Disability, and Making Space by Amanda Leduc, which I have heard really good things about this one as well. And I already know I can get the audiobook for this, but I have just not gotten around to listening to it, so I wanted to get the physical copy because I think that having the physical book will like motivate me to listen to the audiobook, because I've said before, for nonfiction, I like to have a physical book even if I'm listening to the audiobook, because then I can like follow along, take notes, underline, that kind of thing. It helps me like retain information. Okay, I think I got through everything. That was a lot of books. So those are all the books that I have recently gotten. Let me know if you have read any of these, what you're excited to hear about. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!